So a warm welcome to you all here. You are joining a special panel event hosted in Aleph Trust Nurturing the Fields of Change program. This is our community of practice exploring holistic approaches to change facilitation. And in this special event, we really want to dive deeper into the inner dimensions of global warming. And I'll say more about that in a moment by way of framing. But first, a few introductions. So I'm Jessica Bockler. I'm one of the co-founding directors of the Aleph Trust. And with me, or with us here today, to explore the topic of global warming are Dr. Kira Cooper, who is a research associate with the Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience. And she's also the director of the Algoma University Bridge Lab, where she explores really this relationship between inner transformation and systemic change. Welcome to you, Kira. And then also with us is Dr. Renée Lertzman, who is a researcher and a strategist and who has really spent decades, has dedicated her life really, to looking at the psychosocial dimensions of climate and sustainability issues, and who has worked extensively in private and public sector organizations, really working with frameworks and methods to guide people towards taking action in regard to sustainability issues. So big welcome to you as well, Renée. Good to have you here. Yeah. And then there was going to be Steffi Bednarek from the Center for Climate Psychology. She was going to join us today as well, but unfortunately she can't be with us today because of sudden illness in her family. This only happened today, so we send her our good wishes. She said she'd watch the recording later and she really regrets that she can't be with us today. Today, we're hosting this special event on Earth Day. And it couldn't be any more appropriate, I think. Earth Day is in its 55th year. It was first launched in the US in 1970. That feels like a long time ago now, doesn't it? And Earth Day inspired millions of Americans to take to the streets and parks and auditoriums to demonstrate against the impacts of increasing industrial development, which has left and continues to leave this growing legacy of serious impacts, both on human health and then also, of course, on ecosystems worldwide, as is now clear for all to see. And it feels like that many people are taking action around the world, and at the same time, it feels like, gosh, the needle doesn't seem to be shifting significantly, and something else is needed. We find ourselves confronted with these intersecting and escalating crises, from pollution to biodiversity loss, extreme weather events, floods and fires, leading to harvest losses, health crises, escalating poverty and displacement of people, and then, of course, also financial and economic instabilities as a result of all of this. And as we face these wicked predicaments, a growing number of people really believe, and we at Aleph Trust are amongst those, we believe that a deep leverage point for change towards a more flourishing future rests in the transformation of human consciousness, our understanding of who we are, and recognizing industrialist and extractive mindsets that have fueled and continue to fuel these crises, and that we really need to look at ourselves and who we are meant to be as members of Earth, as living beings in a web of life here on Earth. Now, I want to say just a little bit more in terms of conceptual framing, why it's so valuable to look at these inner dimensions. And then as we move through the session, we'll engage in dialogue. We'll, of course, hear from Kira, from Renée, from all of you. And we also want to engage in practice so that we're not just talking about these issues of global warming, but we're also feeling into the issues and we're engaging the imagination and multiple ways of knowing. So the Inner dimensions of systems changed have received a growing recognition in recent years. However, these attempts to link inner dimensions to outer change, they feel as yet somewhat incomplete. They seem quite human-centric often, and they seem to get caught up in certain ways of thinking and doing that are almost kind of, contributing to the problems, the underlying problems we face. And a couple of things that I've observed, for example, that these so-called solutions get caught up in individualism, making the inner dimensions of systems change predominantly about individuals, when really contexts inform what is possible to perceive and to express and to enact. Also, they can get caught up in industrialism, imposing industrialist structures on the inner dimensions of systems change. For example, by imposing a kind of linear goal orientation. And then cognicentrism is a big problem, always or very often. And by that I mean, favoring intellectual sense making over other ways of knowing. So we need to really foreground the kind of depth and the breadth of the inner dimensions, from the individual to the collective, and then also these multiple ways of knowing that are available to us, because we are not atomized individuals and we're not thinking machines. We are nature. We're entangled in a multitude of relationships that sustain us, sustain all life. And there are more and more calls and practices and pathways that are really inviting us to perceive ourselves as nature and to act as nature. And if we look through the lenses of a number of scientific fields that are evolving now, such as complexity theory, then we really see that we live in a world that is emergent. It's made of self-organizing systems which are nested, and they're creative and they're adaptive. And these systems, they organize through positive and negative feedback loops. Negative feedback loops help maintain a balance in a system. They help keep things in a homeostatic range. So if you think, for example, of your own body and your body temperature, it's regulated to stay within certain parameters. And similarly on Earth, we have these set parameters that sustain life. But now there's dysregulation. We have these increasing positive feedback loops. So positive and negative have nothing to do with good or bad, right? Positive feedback loops help amplify change away from the point of balance. That can be helpful. It can help systems evolve, but it can also become destructive if that goes into overshoot. And let's come to that metaphor of the fever here. So let's think of human beings having a fever. I was actually recently in a webinar with a complexity scientist called Neil Taser, and he used this example. He said, think of human beings having a fever. A fever helps us as it drives up the metabolic rate. It revs up the immune system, helps us fight infection. But then the negative feedback loop has to kick back in to return the body to a normal temperature, right? If these positive feedback loops prevail, then, well, you would die. If the fever continues, you die. In the words of Neil Taser, you get rapid expansion of consumption of energy and then collapse, more widely speaking. And what's happening in the world today does feel a bit like that. So how can our understanding of ourselves as nature help us to see where we go from here? Well, again, complexity theory and a number of other scientific fields that are evolving show us that the universe is an inseparable whole. And the systems and the structures that organize our world, they're nested in these holarchies. That's a term that was coined by Arthur Koestler. Holarchies. These are holons or holes that give rise to wholes of ever-increasing complexity. So think of particles giving rise to atoms, giving rise to molecules, giving rise to cells and organs and living organisms. And these then organize in families, in communities, nation states. So I've jumped here from, suborganic holons, as it were, to biological holons, to social holons. So there's this holarchy that informs the living web of life. And whether you perceive a holon, a whole, as a fixed thing, or as an entanglement of interactions and relationships, depends on the scale of observation. So if you look at this scale, then you see a human being, we see each other through the Zoom screen. But when we zoom in, if we were to zoom into each other now, visually speaking, we can begin to see bodily structures and organs, right? If we do an MRI scan, or if we're looking, under the microscope, we zoom in further, we see tissues and cells. Zoom in further and you begin to see atoms. So you zoom in and you see that what seems like, a solid being is actually a constellation of relationships, of collaborative processes that are entangled with everything else. And boundaries are also scale dependent. So again, when you look at different scales, at this scale, we seem like we're separate. But at the molecular level, we share in the biomass of the planet. We are the Earth. And zoom in further, at the level of the quantum realm, we all arise from an energy-rich field referred to by quantum physicists as quantum foam. So what are we? Well, at the quantum scale, we are in fact a kind of boundless body, which is non-causally entangled and non-locally engaged. And that sounds complex and technical, but what it's saying really in essence is that we are a unified living field of interactions and relationships. And I haven't said anything about consciousness yet, but consciousness, do you think consciousness arises from the brain? Many people believe that, and I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but there is actually no evidence to suggest that consciousness arises in the brain. There are alternative views that suggest that the entire cosmos is in some way conscious, that every aspect of this living being has interiority, and that we can engage with the interiority of this living system at every scale. And to me, that is what it means to engage with the inner dimensions of systems change. That means to engage with the living whole and to learn to act in ways that are life-enhancing for the whole. This may sound quite abstract and complex, but it isn't. These ideas have existed for decades, for centuries, for thousands of years, in fact. If we look at our indigenous knowledges and we look at our wisdom traditions, and these traditions have also shown us how to live these ideas through shamanic rites, through meditation, through holistic medicine. So there is wisdom here and intelligence that we can come back to all the time. And it's just a matter of, paying attention to the curriculum that is prescribed to us individually, but also us as a whole human species. So with that as framing, I'd like to invite us just into a short transitional pause and then enter into dialogue, inviting in Kira, inviting in Renée, and then we move along from there. But just take a moment to connect to your own body and your experience of this. So come back home to yourself. You can feel your feet on the ground. Feel how you are sitting, how you're holding yourself, noticing your posture. And just notice what bodily sensations are present right now. Yeah. And just notice the flow of the breath. How is the breath flowing through you right now? And what feelings are present? And see whether you can sense into the whole of you, however that feels right now. And feeling in, how would you describe your inner weather? What is your inner weather? Take another deeper breath. And then I'd like to invite you to post a little something in the chat there. What is your inner weather? What are you checking in with? I can see Mike's invitation there as well, to hear from everyone, to introduce themselves. So I use that as an invitation for you to share yourselves freely throughout this session. If there are ideas that bubble up for you, things you want to share about your work, please feel free to do so. That is welcome. But right now, I'd love to hear from you. What is your inner weather like? How would you describe your inner weather by way of check-in? Springtime sunshine for Javon in Switzerland. Hello, hello. I can see a little icon there, a little emoticon there from Kat. Inner weather is sort of a little bit cloudy, a little bit sunny. Yeah, keep those coming. Inner weather for Mike is rebirth. And George says choppy and changeable and unsettled. Yeah. And hello to you, Anya, from Scotland. Sunny, but the inner weather feels Scottish, windy, grayish, rainy. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for those. It's lovely. Keep those coming. And Kira and Renee, what are you checking in with? I'd like to invite you both in, and I'd love to hear just what weather you're checking in with.
Kira.
I am checking in with some jet lag. I flew from Canada to Germany to teach, so my inner weather is completely discombobulated. I'm not sure what time of the day it is, but there's sunshine outside, and when I left Canada, we had snow. So thank you, sunshine, for warming my heart.
Hmm. Um, well, I'm about to head out of state in a few hours to Arizona. I'm in Oregon right now. Um, I'm really appreciating being in this field, and I'm really appreciating your invocation, Jessica. So my inner weather is feeling kind of like some spaciousness and appreciation, and I'm feeling really touched to experience everyone coming together in this session. Thank you.
Thank you. And as we were planning the session, I'd invited you to consider a little bit what you would like to share to begin with by way of telling something of your story. And I'd love for you to begin with that. Either of you could begin and then the other follow up, but a little something of what is calling you to this field. Why are you working in this field? And how have you come to work in the field? So if I can hand to the two of you, Renée, you're unmuted. We can begin with you and then we'll pass back to Kira. Renée,
Okay.
over to you. Yeah.
I love this question. Someone recently asked me the other day, what is this really about? Um, and for me, it's it's always hard for us, right, to identify our like who we are and our origins and all of that. But for me, it really goes back to feeling deeply just a profound love and a strong desire to protect nature, and particularly nature that is, I mean, there's something here around vulnerability. And going back to when I was very, very little, we lived I grew up south of San Francisco in a kind of woodsy region near Stanford University. So there's a lot of like meadows and creeks and that kind of thing. And so from a very early age, I felt drawn to um, protect and want to kind of take care of the nature that I was connecting with at that time. Um, the home life I had was quite troubled. There was alcoholism, there was debting, there was just like a lot of dynamics going on under the surface. And no one really talking about what was happening. And so I tended to kind of go towards nature very instinctively. And so from an early age, it was really my relational, like my community in a way. And so, in terms of the origin of the work I've been doing, just to fast forward a little bit, I tend to locate part of the story when I was in college. I went to college not far from there in Santa Cruz, University of California, Santa Cruz, which is also a very natural environment with the ocean and the redwoods and all of this. And had a profound influence on me studying and being in that kind of environment. But specifically, what happened was I went in very focused on being a psychologist and really deeply identified as being a psychologist at age 18 and 19, in love with clinical psychology and psychoanalytic psychology specifically. And and I was moving in that direction when I signed up and took an environmental studies and sciences lecture, like introductory 101 type course, where you're in a large lecture hall and you're kind of getting a tour. It's like a survey course where you're, learning each week about a different big issue. Like it might be species loss or toxins or pollution, and so that juxtaposition for me was, deeply disorienting. It was destabilizing because I literally was going between these worlds, shuttling between these worlds, different parts of the campus, um, different cultures of those who look at the planet and existential threat and crisis that affects every aspect of human survival beingness. And then you go over to, we're going to look at human psychology, and we're going to look at all these social issues and, personality and social psychology. And really at that time, late 1980s, no reference to the environment or climate or anything. And so that's what happened for me. That's what it forged at that time and never, ever changed. And I will acknowledge that in the late 80s, early 90s, some of you may be old enough to recall that it was a very vibrant time for this field. And that's when eco-psychology was starting to come into being, and deep ecology, and Schumacher community, this was very vibrant. So I was just kind of right on the cusp of that, and I rode that wave and, got into Joanna Macy's work deeply. And then from Joanna Macy went right into psychoanalytic psychology and so forth. So that's a little bit about my story.
Thank you for that. And it makes me think, yes, all of that was doing so well. And then what happened? What happened? What's happened the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years in particular? Yeah, we'll come back to that. But Kira, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Renee. I feel like I'm getting to know you through this call, so I really appreciate that. In a similar way, I grew up in quite a natural setting. I grew up on an island for most of my life, in the forested area, and the island was First Nations land. So I grew up there as a settler, and always feel like I had one foot in each different world. In many ways, I had a very iconic Canadian upbringing. Everything, making my own maple syrup to dog sleds. I think I have maple syrup in my veins instead of blood. But there is always a sense of walking in between different worlds, and from a young age loved nature, felt this strong kinship and this need to be kinning all the time, and what that relationship would look and feel like. And as I grew older and went to school and studied environmental studies and eventually found work in that field, I started realizing there was this really strong disconnect between how we were learning and then how we were showing up in the world. And working in engineering firms, it was like, what's the cheapest, fastest way we can do everything? And so when you're raised in relationship to the natural world, and where you grow up and you feel like you are part of it, to what is the fastest, cheapest way to exploit it, I felt this breaking inside of me. And in that place of breaking, there was this spaciousness, I think, that that was created. And coming from a pretty strong sustainability background, I started looking at how are people responding to the environmental collapse that we're witnessing around us on so many different fronts, whether that was psychoanalytic lenses, wisdom traditions. And so I brought the sustainability in that way. So I'm, in that sense, I think I'm the opposite side of Renee, bringing sustainability into the psychotherapeutic, and bringing sustainability assessment specifically. So all these different interventions that we're seeing proliferate, what are the effects of them, and how are they moving beyond just treating the individual, and what are the ramifications and the implications for society and systems at large. And so a lot of my work now is looking at what are the paradoxes and challenges when we're trying to have these course corrections for systemic issues through deeply individualized solutions. And also, like, how are we engaged? For example, my work has been looking at wisdom traditions, mindfulness, and different practices, and how are we exploiting them and taking the pieces that are comfortable and easy and sexy and attractive, and taking them out of tradition and consuming them almost like a cafeteria style. And what are the broader implications of those practices, and how might we become in better relation, in right relation with them? So I do work with elders, for example, in Canada, looking at what is right relation and what is reciprocity with the land, with these inner transformations, and that porosity between the inner and the outer, the individual and the system, and expanding that notion of me and we, and human and land, and how might we come into a meta story. We talk about the meta crisis, but so often it's the story of separation. If we could expand the story and hold something much different, then it would invite a deeper conversation into what are we sustaining and for whom, instead of this development paradigm that is only perpetuating more double binds and paradoxes, I think, than we have the capacity to hold. So that's where I'm coming from and to this call.
Thank you, Kira. And I just want to echo what you said to Renee, that I feel like I'm getting to know you, both of you, which is wonderful. We've had crossover points before. Kira, you and I have. Renee, we hadn't met before this call. But it's really fascinating to hear how we are converging on the meta crisis and our experience of it, coming from different viewpoints and different trajectories that are bringing us together. I myself, I grew up in a small town in northern Germany, and I was, spent my childhood outside more than inside. And then I fell for a while into an education system that was very heavily cognicentric. I remember going to university in Germany to study literature, linguistics, and philosophy, and then stepping out of that after about a year, because I felt that that very education system was squeezing the life out of what I loved so dearly, which was poetry and deep reflections on life and the nature of life. And that brought me to the performing arts. So I went from analyzing poetry to enacting poetry, which brought me into human health and working with the arts to alleviate mental ill health, depression, stress, and anxiety, which then brought me to understanding the biopsychosocial determinants of health. So realizing, a human being is well or unwell, often as a result of the context they find themselves in. And that opens, of course, the aperture of awareness towards the whole system, the whole, the embeddedness of life, and that we are all part of this deeper interconnected web of life, or we're separated in some way from it, which connects us to this story of separation, Kira, that you were referencing there. And for Aleph Trust, that has been a journey too. In a way, from the fields of psychology, transpersonal psychology, we have always had a connection to ecology, transpersonal ecology. But really, that deeper realization and understanding of social change and the inner dimensions that inform change has come more to the fore more recently, I would say, over the last 5-6 years within the organization. So all of that said, what do we make of the inner dimensions? How do we perceive them? I'm curious what you make of this metaphor of global warming as a collective fever. How does that land with either of you?
Well, I guess just to reflect on the discourse of the inner and the outer. I feel you alluded to this, Jessica. I feel the way that we're approaching this and thinking about this still feels kind of binary, kind of a dualism. And I'm not quite sure. I feel like, Kira, hearing you speak, I was able to access much more of a relationality lens. But what I experience is, so I should back up and just say that I didn't say much about my practice or what I do. Currently, I work with organizations primarily. I'm not a therapist. I don't do private practice. I used to be an academic and taught and actually designed courses for years, including in Victoria, BC, with practitioners. I'm very drawn and passionate to work with practitioners in the field, whether it's, transportation or energy or food or water or waste or climate or whatever. It's where I feel drawn to. And so over the years, I've been kind of interfacing with teams and organizations and communities and experimenting with different ways of framing what this is, what this work is. inner work, or, human dimensions, or whatever we want to call it. And at the moment, now only in the past few years, as you acknowledge, it's kind of become a thing, right? Like the inner development goals launched, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. I was at that initial summit. Maybe some of you all were. And it was a big kind of splash, IDGs, inner development goals. This is a thing. And um, and now more and more people are sort of catching on to that and using this language. And I feel confused by it because there literally is no inner separation between the inner and the outer. And if you look at the way that many people do what practitioners and organizations, how teams and organizations approach addressing these climate change, global warming, you can see pretty quickly, if you are psychoanalytically or psychologically oriented, you can see pretty quickly the expression of a lot of maybe tendencies, projections, patterns, mechanisms that aren't particularly healthy, constructive. And that includes the splitting, that includes the cognocentrism, which I haven't heard before. That's a great term. You see the way meetings are run. You see the way that the way we talk about people who are not working on these issues as if they're other and don't care. So you see all of that. And to me, it's just like, how do we even, I don't even understand how we can just say there's the inner over here and the outer over here. So, with regards to the prompt around a fever, that's not really my usual entrance into this. I my perception is an experience is that there's absolutely a quality of pressure and heat and acceleration. And so the question I have, and I think a question, like a key question, is how do we, when the stakes are so high, in high stakes kind of environments and contexts, how do we stay regulated and present and integrated as much as possible? To me, that is the main question that I find most compelling, and is, given that's the case, how do we stay? What does it mean to stay engaged, functioning? And then furthermore, I think the other driving question I've had that's guided everything I've done in my research over the years is, and it goes back to, I feel, Kira, what you were sharing earlier about just this profound experience you had of relationship and relationality with nature and place. And to me, the question is, what awakens, cultivates, and enables our capacity to want to repair, to heal, to mend, to make better, and what doesn't. So if you think about, I'm trying to stay in the metaphor here of the the fever. So if you think about the like what conditions support our capacity to want to heal the fever versus get under the covers or whatever we tend to want to do. And I really, I feel like that's the question. And I think we all have some piece of that story. We're all holding some piece of that story, and it's not any one thing, right? It's very particular. And just as a side note, I'm heading just a few hours after this event to a big conference called the Society for Environmental Journalism in Phoenix, Arizona, which is, a desert region dealing with a lot of stuff. But it's going to be a gathering of all these people who literally cover climate and the environment. probably from maybe from BBC, but mostly probably US media outlets. So I feel like I'm literally going into like a fevered environment. Um, so some free association for you there. Whoop. Okay, Kira.
Yeah, I love what you said, Renee. I want to pull on one of those threads that really resonated and I really felt it. And that was that want to repair and to heal. And I noticed like your choice of language is so specific there because so much of what we're seeing is this inner development. And it's like, yes, we have this bifurcation of like inner and outer separate, human nature separate, sitting with the illness versus healing it, right? Like I think what we're doing now is we're coming up with all these different processes so we can numb ourselves to the fever. We take a pain to the fever instead of spending the time to sit in relationship. What is the fever? How might we heal it? And what is ailing? And that takes time and care. And that is a very different model than trying to engineer a solution that is sitting by the bedside. And I've had a good amount of death in knocking on family doors quite recently. And I've had the privilege of sitting with dying people and tending to wounds and illness. And I come from an infectious disease background. So the metaphor of the fever resonated and I love it for so many reasons. One of them is when you have a really good fever, like I had with COVID, you're in this state of delirium where you're not sure what's real and what's not real. And it feels like we're almost in that liminal space right now of being in this feverish tension, this paradox. The planet is healing, and psychotherapists, for example, Piero Ferrucci in Italy, is saying we have an ice age of the heart. So holding that, we are becoming hot as a planet and colder in our relationships. And so when we sit with the fever, not trying to get rid of it, but to learn from it and be with it and be present to it, that's a totally different form of inner healing and accessing those inner dimensions, that inner landscape, than just saying we know what to do with it. And I'm teaching in Germany right now, and I'm working in a business school and looking at how can we redefine our relationship with business in a time of meta crisis. So how can we move away from just trying to do less harm, but do more good? And how can we do that in a way that's not engineering solutions as well? So again, it's coming back to sitting. How can we learn to sit with the discomfort of what's going on in the world? How uncomfortable we are sweating, watching our sense making ecologies collapse, watching different parts of the world become uncomfortable, and not jump into a reaction and try to fix it, but how do we learn from it and come into relationship with it? And that, that picks back on what Renee was talking about, regulation. How do we regulate? How do we recognize we're coming off course and then come back? And perhaps that is a deeper invitation to what kinds of practices we can engage in. But as we've mentioned so far, like other groups are diving into them, and then you mechanize these practices, you mechanize, and your relationship. It's like, what can I extract from here to make me personally feel better?
I'd love to hear a bit more about how you are approaching that in a business school context. Because I mean, it's very similar to my practice, and I feel like it makes sense that there's some similarity because, and we're also having this conversation in the context of your organization, the Aleph Trust, which I feel is also dedicated to this entire orientation of cultivating spaces and cultivating the conditions that enable our capacity to integrate and process and metabolize and be with. So Kira, I'm curious to hear, in your business school environment, how are you encouraging people to stay with and be in relationship with versus going into that reactive fight, flight response?
Yeah, good question. One of the main things is taking students outside. How do you encourage them to develop kinship and to rediscover their place in the world when you do it from a comfortable, climate controlled space, right? I need you to be uncomfortable. I need you to be muddy. I need you to get your hands in the soil and to connect. So that's one of the things that I'm doing. And also, how can we redefine pedagogy? I also teach happiness, well-being, and sustainability. So how do we teach in a different way? So I don't have students sit in rows and columns. We sit in circle. We do not have, I know everything as a teacher, you as a student, you listen to me. We co-learn, we co-unlearn, and then we invite different speakers in as well. So it's not just one person holding that. The third panelist, Steffi Bednarek, for example, from the Center of Psychology and Change, she came in as one of the guest speakers. So how can we create these containers? We're inviting different people, so it's not just one speaker. And Renée, I hope to bring you in there too, because I know our students would love to have you.
Yeah, it's a very similar approach that I take when working in business, because most of what I've been doing for 15 years is sometimes quite large, like Google and some large companies. And so I'm hearing you describe this, I'm reflecting that it's a very similar strategies to kind of create a different, more multiplicity. So I'll bring lots of people in and have different voices and mix up the format. And FYI, I did a Substack not long ago where I did a reflection on impact, like when we bring people together for quote impact, what are we really doing? And I wrote this whole piece about formats and how we really need to kind of blow up a lot of our pedagogies around how we bring people together. As I say this, as I'm about to go to a conference, you know, which is going to be a bunch of panels and talks and people like totally like that. Anyway, Jessica, did you want to come in?
Yeah, all of this resonates. I mean, this is at the core of Aleph Trust. And what's interesting for us is that we work online, but that doesn't mean that we're engaging in sort of disembodied ways. In our masters, for example, in the first year, we have a module that's called Learning Through Integrative Practice. And essentially, everybody designs a kind of quest for themselves, which runs throughout the year. Exploring what do I need to do to take care of myself in terms of my emotions, my spirituality, my physical body, my mental abilities, sort of interweaving activities and practices that feel like, you know, they create an opportunity to become whole and more integrated. And every student defines this according to their own sense of what is calling them, where they're at, what they feel they need and are looking for in their lives. And we really encourage them to look at that holistically. And then we sit in circle and hear into how are these stories unfolding, what's going on for you. And our faculty sit in circle. So there's a continuous circle process that goes on, and we also meta reflect on how are things going, where do we want to, you know, change tack, do we want to do something differently, can we approach things playfully, experientially, where do we want to weave in a practice session, so we don't just do, you know, the intellectual lecturing, which you would associate more with kind of traditional university education. And we do that still sitting within the mainstream education framework because we're validated by a major, you know, UK university. But within that, we can do quite a few things that are embodied and more spiritual and more kind of holistic, if you will. Yeah. But it's not easy. It's not easy. There are edges to that work as well. Yeah. I'm curious what's bubbling in the room as you're listening to this conversation. I'm curious. I've seen there's a lot happening in the chat window that I can't keep up with, but I'd like to put the question out to you. What is resonating for you? How are you making sense of this? Is there something you'd like to contribute to the conversation or ask of Kira or Renée? So we'll take a pause, and I'd like to see if any hands want to go up there. Yeah, Maria, come on in. That was quick.
Hi, I've just been taking so many notes because so much stuff resonated. And I just wanted to thank you, Jessica and Renee and Kira, for all your insight. It's been really lovely. And actually, I think it's not much, it's not really a question. It's more like a reflecting back, because Kira mentioned here a few things that I was just like, I know that when I need to write something down, it's because like it's hit me and I really need to like read it again. And I really love like the fact that you're exploring like this, noticing like this disconnect between like what we learn and what we actually do. And to be honest, like I grew up like quite in a like city life and very much like fast paced, and coming more and more into like nature, and knowing that I'm nature as well, like trying to feel into that knowing has been very transformative. And at the same time, I feel very much, and I don't know if you'd relate in any part of in your process or the people in this call, that like there's like a cognitive dissonance between like, oh, like I'm doing all these things and I'm feeling all of this like kinship, and at the same time I'm going to the store where there's like just I don't know, I was just like talking to this person working the store, and they're just like, do you want this, do you want the receipt, do you want next. And so like this very sterile environment that we still kind of go to and we still interact with. And for me, that has brought up a lot of like sadness. And it feels sometimes like I don't know how to navigate those places without falling to that trap of disconnect again. And I mean, Renee also talked about this very much, and Jessica. And I don't know, I think this is just something that comes up for me a lot, and it made sense. So I don't want to talk much more and take up more space. But yeah, it is hard. It just feels really hard to keep it stable in that sense. So yeah, thank you.
Hearing you, those tensions I think are very real. And Kira mentioned, you know, the double binds we find ourselves in as well, no matter what we do, you know, damned if you do, damned if you don't. And those, you know, constant tensions that are pulling at us, which can then also fuel that sense of heat, right? The kind of fever fever pitch of everything. Yeah. We'll hold that thought, Maria, and I want to come to Trevor and see what Trevor wants to weave in, and then we'll circle back to Kira and Renee.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for the invitation. I just posted a little something in the chat earlier on. I've just been so encouraged by what everybody's been saying, such coherence. And yes, it is true that around the world, there seems to be a gathering together around this concept of wholeness. That, you know, the history of science has made us think about little bits and parts and how maybe they connect. But I think now a lot of people are saying, let's look at wholeness first and how that diversifies so that we're all part of something together, and yet we're all different. And within that context, what I was posting there was that for 25 years, I was a medical practitioner interested in family dynamics, systemic family therapy type of approach. And I developed a view of emotions. But as a medic, for me, emotions are physical. They're the biochemistry, they're the chemistry of our body getting organized to either move us towards facing a problem or stepping away from it, or not just facing a problem, any change that comes on. And when I started mapping how loss emotions, the unpleasant loss emotions of grieving, can accumulate in people's lives, and started talking to my patients about the complex accumulation of loss reactions going on over decades, I was able to start mapping their internal emotional chaos. And it became incredible how much emotional tension people were carrying. And after a while, I began to recognize patterns within this emotional chaos that we were mapping, and could associate certain patterns of grieving with behavioral responses that doctors could diagnose as common mental illnesses: depressions, anxieties, compulsive behaviors, relationship breakdowns. And by teaching people a healthy model of adjustment to disappointments and setbacks and hurts, they could untangle this chaos and harness the emotional energy into a constructive action plan. And what happened? We saw incredible changes, and we're seeing them now, in people's sense of identity, their inner peace, their inner strength, their ability to find inner harmony and restore outer relational harmony simultaneously. So I train coaches, and it's gone international, and the organization's run by other people. So I'm now developing the theory more, and I put that theory into a book. It's a bit heavy going, but it's because it's quite, it's the science behind the whole thing. There is an upfront access book that people can have. It's called Emotional Logic is the method, and there's a book called Emotional Logic, Harnessing Your Emotions into Inner Strength. But the point that I want to bring to you is one of complete coherence, that when you start seeing our emotional inner heart as a physical process that is moved by our relational qualities, which is what grieving is about. It's about love turned into a mode of response when we've been hurt. I start talking about emotions being the meeting place of your physical and spiritual natures, because we're connected into the cosmos, and those emotional responses are actually are shaping our connection into the environment. And what we've seen is that as people come to that place of inner order, because it's learnable, people can learn it on their own, they can join courses, it actually calms their environments. And so when I saw the theme of this congress, or whatever you want to call this, I thought, yes, actually, this is what the final book, the theory book, is saying. That this maps into, I'm now calling it a physiology of light, deeper than our physiology of our molecular physiology, because quantum theory is saying that every single molecule is emergent from a quantum field and all of this sort of thing. That is the whole that we're part of. And so our emotional chemistry is directly connecting into the quantum field. And also our environment is emerging out of that same quantum field. And it's so, our embodiment, the stress-related physical illnesses that we get are all tied up at this physiology of light level that disorganizes the body, disorganizes our environment. But as you bring order to the emotional experience of life and our understanding of ourselves, so the whole lot settles down and we can connect in a more constructive way into that quantum field and into partnerships with other people. So I just wanted to share that I am mighty encouraged to hear so many people seeing this coherence towards wholeness and the importance of the inner heart. I'm sorry I've spoken so long about it, but I thank you for the opportunity to join with you and celebrate that there is a possible way forward.
It's lovely that you've mirrored that back, which resonates very much with a number of things that I flagged right at the beginning of the session, right? And it also ties back into the work that Renée is doing in regard to self-regulation, co-regulation, really looking at, yes, I mean, there's no inner and outer, right? It is all one. And that's really important. That is at the core of this. So thank you, Trevor, and feel free to, I think you've already done so, but feel free to put links into the chat there. And I'd like to come back to, you're welcome. I'd like to come back to Renée and to see, how do you approach this holing when you're working in places of heat where there is this dysregulation as Trevor has described it?
Well, I'm in touch with where the edges of that are for me, to be honest. I think it in a way, I feel like what we're speaking about is almost simple, which is it's about, and anyone is welcome to push back with me on this. It's about containers and how we relate with different kinds of containers and what is a container and what is containment. That's how I relate with this question of regulation of the holism is, and I feel like we've been guided in a way, even in this session, with the container of my relationship with my inner experience, my breath, the inner weather, but also then with this particular relational field that we're in right now, holding the container of where I am physically right now in this part of the world, holding that with, it feels like, and even right here where there's an intersection. I was really surprised to hear you say that Aleph Trust is on virtual only, because my experience was it felt very physical, and I had this entire image in my mind of a building and like an actual physical space. And so I think that it's just something to really look at here. Curious, Kira, if anything comes up for you in this prompt.
Yeah, no, I'm also surprised. It feels like a family, or it feels like a really beautiful alternative pedagogical system. So definitely echoing what Renee said there. And yeah, I feel like this is quite an interesting space and time to have these conversations. And that point on containment, I think, is really key. I think my hat in infectious disease comes into play there. And when I think one of the questions or prompts that Maria brought up that is still really pulling at me is how many people in the climate space are leaving because of the vicarious traumatization of what they're learning. They're calling it now like this climate change is this higher order trauma. And how many people working in that space, just as researchers, as clinicians, um, different people at advisory roles, they are having to leave because every single part of their day is looking at the implications of climate change, loss of biodiversity, different factors, exceedance of planetary boundaries and whatever. And then they go home and then they can't get away from it. They turn on the news, they can't get away from it. They go to the grocery store, they can't get away from it. And Renee, that probably is quite salient with your work. And is that what you're seeing also with clients, or in your experience? Are you feeling that as well?
Absolutely. And I feel, yeah, like acknowledging what it is that we are having to apprehend and engage with. In those spaces, obviously this is evolving, but in those spaces of the more scientific, technical policy, business work, there's obviously a lot of splitting going on where there really isn't space to acknowledge and reflect and process, right? And so then people end up like, it becomes this kind of, traumatic material, and unmetabolized, and it gets like, I don't know if any of you saw the in-depth piece about the climate scientist, Peter Colmes. I don't know, Kira, did you see that major magazine feature piece about this climate scientist, Peter, who, is very open about how this has impacted his life and his work and his mental health and all of that. I'm not sure if I'm seeing people leaving. I'm seeing people engaging in a variety of strategies to process and heal and cope. I tend to follow climate people who are on the more, I would consider more integrated individuals. And I don't mean that to sound like a value judgment of like, more evolved. I'm just saying more integrated, meaning people who show up with the capacity to be in the fullness of the experience, the fullness of the spectrum, so that I notice that I'm tuning into a fluidity or a capacity to be, in despair and grief and express that. And at the same time, also in a capacity to celebrate and to be in joy with nature and so forth. So I'm just kind of tracking what it feels to me more and more people are moving into as we see more people and leaders modeling that way of being with this work. Does that make sense? So I feel like I'm witnessing some expansion of capacity, but it doesn't mean that there isn't also likely the other side of that going on that I'm tracking less of right now. Those I work with teams and teams inside organizations, usually like really big, like Johnson and Johnson or whatever. And and I tend to work with the people who are like, they're just really in it, you know, they're really super committed, super engaged, really passionate, really driven, but they also are dealing with enormous sense of despair, um, of yeah, just feeling really demoralized. So all of that is there right now too.
Yeah, that really resonates. I mean, and maybe we're all living through that in our own ways. And I remember moments of waking up to this, really waking up to the crises that are unfolding, you know, through reading some of the IPCC reports or other, you know, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports and other biodiversity loss reports, global disaster risk reports. There was a time when I immersed myself in that material quite extensively because I was also, you know, I still am at Aleph Trust teaching modules that are about taking transpersonal principles and applying them, putting them to action in the world. And I wanted to give some orientation for the students around the crises. And so I felt, you know, also a personal responsibility to immerse myself in that material. But the emotional toil or the emotional turmoil that generates, and that sense of also, oh my God, here I am, I'm facing this, it feels enormous, and I am one person. What do I do now? What do I do with that knowledge? And then trying to find ways to move into action, but also still feeling and living with that anxiety for quite a long time and needing to tend to the inner wounds from this. And I think we all experience this, right? In one way or other, that we're caught up in that processing and sense making. And it doesn't immediately resolve.
Right. I think we need an entirely different approach to working on climate change.
Say
I
more.
mean,
Yeah.
entirely. Like, I just feel like, I guess, you know, what comes up for me, and I've been saying this literally ad nauseum for like, I feel like for decades, I feel like a broken record. It is not appropriate or responsible to expect individuals to process this on their own. And it is irresponsible to put climate material and information out into the world without also attending to the containers and the context and conditions for people to metabolize and process it. Full stop. Full stop. So I feel like this relates to every science museum out there, every class. Like, we have got to take responsibility and recognize that what it is we're talking about is deeply it's I want to say traumatic, but it's more than that, right? It's more complex than that. But it's what my colleague Sarah Payton, who's a neuroscience educator, she does beautiful work. She surfaced for me a research around what's called complex truths and what the experience is of being with complex truths, of being able to speak to complex truths, and that it actually, when we can speak to complex truths, it supports our immune system. There's been research on this. And so I feel that we have to look at climate through this lens of complex truths that are going to impact people in very different ways, depending on our background and context and existential situation. And it's, yeah, it's inappropriate to expect people to do this on their own. So therefore, if you really take this on board, and what I often find myself saying is, if you take on board the science of what we know about human psychology and neuroscience and trauma psychology, if you like literally take that on board and accept that, that should and would change every aspect of our work on climate change, right? Because all the science is there, all the work is there. People need conditions, people need relationships, we need attunement, we need to feel that we're not alone, we need to feel also a sense of what we can do. All of that has to come together. And And so that's just what's very striking to me right now. And I have a feeling that we are probably in the midst of climate work like evolving tremendous, just hearing about your work, Kira. I mean, that's literally, innovating pedagogy right now, in an institutional setting. So it is happening. I just think it needs to happen more and be addressed and named more openly.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Renee. It feels so affirming to hear you say that. It really feels like, it's this individualist stance that we're being, that we're almost being asked in some ways to confront this on our own, and that sense of aloneness with something that is actually, about all of us and needs us in community feels really at the heart of this. Yeah. I'm aware we've been going for just over an hour. I'd like to invite us just into a very short stretch break. Fill up your water glasses and come back to the screen in just a couple of minutes. So let's take a couple of minute break, and we'll see each other again, and then we'll carry on from there. Just use this moment to stretch out as you need to. Making into a move. Thank you for coming back, and let's feel into all of this from a more embodied perspective, and also, yeah, engaging a little bit of somatic sensing and engaging the imagination in this to invite in sense making beyond the kind of intellectual discussion. And I'd like to just invite you to, first of all, come back into your body. So notice how you're sitting, settling in on the chair. Come back to yourself. Just notice how you're sitting. You might want to make some changes to your posture. Have your feet on the ground. We're just settling into a short practice that will help us sense make, moving out of the kind of predominantly cognitive mode and into a little bit more sensing, feeling, slowing down with this. So as you're settling into your body, I invite you to connect to the flow of the breath. Notice how you're breathing. Yeah. And let the breath take you downward, more towards the core of your body, into the belly. And from your belly, you can feel downward into the pelvis, hip sockets, and down from there into the legs. And feel your connection with the ground, with your feet rooted firmly on the ground. So invite this downward orientation with the flow of the breath. And really connect now to that sense of the core inside your belly, deep inside your belly. It's the physical center of gravity, but in spiritual traditions, it's also associated with life force, our connection to universe, a universal will. So deep in the center there, can you take a seat sitting down at the core. And from there, just feel into the web of life. The very strong connections you have, but also the many subtle connections, the threads that extend from you and toward you. All these myriads of threads holding you, sustaining you, informing and shaping you, the web of life. The countless relationships within us and between us. Whether it is through the food we eat, the air we breathe, our mental life, our emotional life, our connections to family and friends and colleagues, people in this circle. And our connections to nature, the more than human. And can you feel into the web of life and notice which of these relationships feels vital right now, here, in relation to what we're exploring? Who has something to say? So I'll ask a few questions in a moment, and I just invite you to notice what comes up. And the voices, the information that might come forward, it may not be so comfortable. It may be, it may not. But just trust that it has something to offer. Who or what is sustaining you? Who or what is sustaining you? Who or what stands behind you? Is this an ancestor, a voice from the past, vital learning coming to the fore now? Who or what stands behind you? And who or what stands beside you? Colleagues, friends, family, or fellow non-human beings? Who is accompanying you? What do they have to say? And who or what speaks from above? Maybe a kind of spiritual guidance, or maybe a kind of cosmic pattern, a larger pattern that is helping you sense make. It could be a bird or a cloud. If you just notice what comes from above, what does the above have to say? And who speaks from below? Soil, grass, rock, maybe another element or a creature, maybe the earth. And what is being said? And come back to the core of you. If you've wandered off a little, come back to the core. Let these voices settle. Maybe they've said a little, maybe a lot. Maybe there have been other kind of signals, more somatic. Maybe there have been some images or some memories. Connect back to the breath. Just take a moment to release those voices, release them with the breath. And just take a moment to open your eyes and to take some notes, just to capture what emerged, however small. There's no right or wrong. So we'll just take a couple of minutes to capture anything that emerged there. And you can just take a couple of notes. If it feels more like doodling, mark making, because there was a pattern or a texture, go for it. But I'll be quiet and we'll just have another moment to Pay attention to what is present with us, what's there, feeling into the whole of ourselves and into this web of life. Yeah, just trust and follow through with the messages that are present. And there may also be a direction that feels most nourishing. Where are you most drawn towards? Which voice is calling the strongest, if you will? What quality? What relationship? Just notice that. And just rounding that off. And yes, as Mike has already done, I'm curious what emerged for you. What did you notice? What voices came to the fore? What was suggested to you in terms of what next? What should I do? What emerged for you? So feel free to kind of check in through the chat, post something there. And it may be very simple, and simple is good. You are right where you need to be, says Anya. Nothing I do alone. Thank you, Maria. When I let go of the old trapeze bar, I won't fall, but rather fly. Thank you, Elizabeth. The inner and outer meeting community. Thanks, Mike. The spirit of the whole is peace and restores a heart of peace when sought. Thank you, Trevor. Fever, friends forevermore. I love that. Wally, thank you. Yeah. What emerged for me is I don't know. Yeah, thank you, Fran, for naming that. It's also really lovely just to pause with you and slow down with you and just sit here in circle. When we were thinking about planning this event, there was this question around Well, we do sense making, we try to feel into these things, but how can we also show up in the world? What does this mean for us in terms of what we each do? Maybe also what we do together, maybe rather is a big question in terms of how and what we do together. So I'm curious, where do you want to take this from here? That's a big question. Some of us are obviously in community through the Aleph Trust, some of us through nurturing the fields of change, some of us are new to each other. But let's just sense make in terms of, yeah, what does this mean for us? How do we want to show up in the world? What wants to happen now? There's no right or wrong. We're all standing on the edge of something. I've just thrown the talking stick up in the air. I could always turn back to Kira and Renee, but I'm very curious what wants to happen between us. If anyone feels called to speak. Yeah, Elizabeth, come on in.
I am loving this space and all of you in it. I'm loving the possibility of co-creating a different quality of connection, a different quality of dialogue. And my sense around what's next is to continue carving out this precious and, may I say, sacred time and space to continue to feel into the mystery and to continue sitting with the question. The amount of wisdom that came through in that beautiful chat sharing a few minutes ago, I sense there's more and more and more that's just beckoning for us to listen, pay attention to, and to speak into and be expressed. So I have the appetite for that. If anyone else is game to continue the conversation and continue to feel into what wants to emerge.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, and feel free to speak from your heart through the voices that are with you in terms of what it all means for you and how you want to show up in the world, what wants to happen through you as well as through us. So thank you, Elizabeth, for getting us going with that. Call to slow down. Barbara. Yeah.
Hi, I've got so many things running in my head, so let me see if I make sense. um, Generally, I wanted to share that I feel optimistic and I feel there's a shift. And apparently, on the 31st of March, there was a shift in planets, and it's about a time of moving, into our sovereign power and not being so much under control of, people who don't really care about us and so on. So I'm generally optimistic, and I literally never read news. I don't have television, never seen a newspaper since 2009. I think because for me every single day much more good happens than not, and this whole thing, the quantum physics. So when we're focusing on what's wrong, then I feel we perpetuate that. But I'm just fascinated by the cycles of the moon and the sun and the precision, and it's just like, wow, it's just amazing. Anyway, as you know, I did used to work in the oil business, and I'm part of an alumni, and we're actually, come together regularly to talk about energy transition, and so that's something that I'm working on. What frustrates me quite a bit is that there's many different opinions, and there's this tendency to say you're wrong, and I'm right. And, you know, so what I would love to see is a gathering of people and like really sharing information. And, you know, that's something I'm looking at. When, you know, when we had in Oxford last year, the Euro test, by the film that was made, you know, with kid girls, you know, that film. Um,
You're breaking up a little
Sorry,
bit
can you
there,
hear me?
Barbara. Yeah, you're back now.
Okay,
You're back now.
sorry. Okay, so yeah, I'm just saying I was so inspired by that film that we saw in Oxford, you know, about, you know, kids making change and so on. And I'm looking at how I can make a film about plastic. That I go to the Middle East a lot still. There's so much waste. It breaks my heart, and I'm always trying to do something. And no one has any clue you know. One, they don't know a plastic bottle is made from petrochemicals, and then the harm that's doing. And no one has a clue what happens to it once they've chucked it, you know, somewhere. And this is something I'm really passionate about, and I was inspired by that film to try and do something, you know, to somehow bring a film together. Anyway, sorry, it was a bit of like the. I just think there's so much that we can all do, and even like for me, like don't buy anything. You know, I encourage people, don't buy anything wrapped in plastic. Don't go to supermarkets. There's refill stores. There's organic farmers, you know, that deliver in cardboard boxes. There's so much we can do, you know, to support this kind of farming communities and natural products and so on. But yeah, sorry.
Barbara, no need to apologize. You're beautifully sense making and sharing both reframing of perspective, you know, permitting us to see more of, and sense more of the whole, and at the same time naming very concrete actions that we can all take. And all of this feels part of you know, ways forward. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. But yeah, and thanks for doing this. So beautiful.
Thank you. Kira and Renée, what is alive for you now as you're listening in? And in terms of action, taking action, moving forward, is there something that you would like to weave into the conversation as well?
I'll let Renée go first.
Okay. Well, what's coming up for me is I think that organizations such as this one are it's a very, there's a remit to gather people. And I don't mean just Olive Trust, but I actually feel that, you know, institutions and organizations need to evolve themselves into being conveners and guides. And I write about this a lot. I've developed a training program around this. I'm going to be offering more in the future. I had just have a book coming out next year about this. And so when we talk about like appreciating how good it feels to be in this space and to be in the field and this notion of relationality and container, I feel that that's the action to take, is to take that very seriously and continue to look at how we bring people together in a way that is sustaining. Side note, I have a project called Project Inside Out that was supported by a grant initially. It's been without funding for a few years, so it's sort of like coasting. But if you go into Project Inside Out, there's 5 guiding principles. Attune, reveal the truth, equip people with resources, convene, and sustain. And so my experience is that a lot of times people come together and there's energy, and then it kind of like doesn't always sustain. And so I feel like that's the action to take, is how do we evolve and develop these capacities and our ways of being. So so that's kind of my primary response. And I personally, you know, I'm very focused on development and bringing kind of these skill sets and tools to communities and organizations whenever I can. And I'm looking into training more and more people to be able to do that, kind of take that out into the world, kind of this guiding approach. But I feel like what we're experiencing here is an expression of that. It's like we all are, I'm impacted by it, you know, like you can't be part of something like this and I don't think be impacted in some way. Because, you know, I heard myself say some things an hour ago, like I didn't anticipate saying. And that's true for all of us, right? That when there's a field, we join and are part of that field and things shift and change.
Yeah.
So I'm also appreciating the field that you've been able to cultivate, Jessica, and your colleague, Francesca. You know, I'm curious about that. Like, I think we take that for granted, but like what goes into actually supporting and creating the kind of field that we're all experiencing here in this space, and to get really like clear about that.
Yeah. Thank you for all of that, Renée. And one thing that my heart goes out to you, but also to the project that you've created and the challenges around sustaining that work, you know, without the funding. I've lived that. I'm very aware of how difficult that is, and it's one of the challenges I think that we're facing. Yeah. But also thank you for the reflections around that. And I will share in a moment when we wrap up, I will share the links, of course, to that project and to some of the other work that you're doing. Yeah. Kira, would you like to come back in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think part of it for me is how can we learn to sit with the fever, coming back just to complete the circle. And we've constellated this beautiful group of people from around the world. And I think that's quite a powerful thing. Technology is challenging, it's becoming more challenging, but there's still great things it can do, such as bringing all of us together in this time to create this digital community. And I'm very grateful for that. And I think as we're moving forward, my hope is that the energy that each individual here has cultivated in the flame, the little bit of glow that we've brought together can continue and have a positive ripple effect in the next few people that you interact with, and that we keep this alive. And I think that that's part of the task in coming back into right relationship, is to not let these kinds of positive spaces fall apart, and just to let that energy go. There's something quite beautiful in what we've all presenced as one, and we can't do it without everyone. So I think that that's showing my gratitude for everyone who showed up, especially to the organizers. It is a heavy lift to bring so many people together. So deep thanks to Jessica and Fran and Renee as well, and Steffi, who couldn't make it but is here in spirit with us.
Yeah, thank you, Kira. It feels like it could be a really beautiful gift actually to this group right now to share what resources us as we leave this space, to connect into that which uplifts us, gives us a sense of energy as we move forward, and to collectively pool that a little bit right now so we can bathe in that and then go out into the world and do whatever else it is that we're doing, where we are maybe, you know, confronting more uncomfortable realities and relationships. So it just feels like that is the right thing to do to round off this circle today. And I'd love you to either unmute and speak to that in brevity. So it could be a sentence. I'm offering whatever it is that you feel called to offer from your heart into this pool of resources, and we can bathe in that together. Or to drop it into the chat window and then I will read it out. Let's just flow with that organically. Go for it. Let's give each other a little uplift. Please feel free to unmute and speak. So you don't even need to raise your hand. Go for it. Ina, yeah.
I want to talk about connection and feeling inside ourselves and around ourselves this web of life, and creating this web of life every moment of our existence, like connecting to the nature, to the animal, to the people, to the world, and feeling kind of like being aware how we connected in vibrationally and socially and physically. And I am grateful for this place which allows us reconnect, and I invite us to continue this weaving of web outside this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ina. Claire says connection with like-minded souls like this. And Mike says, hey, climate choir beckons. Ooh, that sounds great. One of my amazing places of connection. Must leave. Thank you for being here. Barbara.
I'm always, as you most likely know, very happy to share some breath work and to explain the science of that. And it speaks a bit to Trevor was talking to earlier about heart coherence and how we breathe impacts the rhythm of the hearts, which impacts every single system in the body. So I'm trained in that, and then there's some very simple practices that you don't need to sit down on a mat to do. What I call your every breath changes so much. So I'm very happy to share things in that. It has physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, everything is impacted.
Thank you, Barbara.
And breathing is free.
And we can weave it also into nurturing the fields of change. Let's talk about
Yeah.
that for sure. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I'm always happy to talk about that.
What resources you? Any other offer? It doesn't have to be an offering. So it's more in this moment now. What is it that resources you? See if there's anything else still that wants to bubble up. I'm inviting you to share with us what gives you light and joy.
If I might just sort of respond to that, I find it so strange that I find this optimism rising within me, despite the crises that we're surrounded by. Somehow, I just have this deep belief in the creativity of the human heart and the capacity to adapt and adjust and to build relationships that are responsive to each other and supportive. And this, what we've just experienced here, is just, a beautiful example of the idea of forming a trust group where we can share our hearts, and learn from each other, and gain the energy to move on and engage with life rather than withdraw from life. I think that's the key. That I don't know where this optimism but I just like to share that I do believe there seriously is hope in the human heart. Thank you.
Thank you. And Elizabeth has just done something lovely there. She's moved to an image on the wall. Be still and know. I don't know if you can see that, but Elizabeth's webcam there. Yeah. And Isa has offered heartful silence. Renée, when the conditions are there, yes. And yeah, at the moment, the bullfinches are visiting my garden and are inspiring me. And James says the mycelium. And Karen, planting seeds in the garden, enjoying many tulips. I planted last autumn. They're now in full bloom. Lovely. Thank you. And it is really noticeable how the energy has shifted in the room. And there is something here, isn't there, for how we sit with the big questions, engage with all our capacities available to us. Yes, look at the concrete actions we can take in the world, enable each other to become conveners and to take forward whatever we feel called to bring into the world as an offering to address the crises that we're facing, and to do this kind of work, to be there for each other, to commune. And that can feel hard in today's world. And it's a strange thing because that is what we naturally do as human beings, but somehow it's squeezed out of us in the crazy modern world that we are in. So I'm grateful to Kira and Renée for joining us today. And the journey for us continues in nurturing the fields of change. The program is ongoing and it is about collective sense making. It is about communing. It's an ongoing program, and it's when I call it a program, people always can start to think, it's there's content that is programmed in advance and then delivered and taught. But it is more a space where we are trying to sense make and sit with questions and weave in practice and, yes, some content. So you're very welcome to join that. And let me also, as I'm wrapping up here, flag that, of course, Renée and Kira are doing important work in the world, as is Steffi, and we're going to share the links to their work in the chat right now. Francesca, if you could do that, so that you can look up what they're doing, follow up with them, and stay in touch with us. Kira and Renée, thank you again. Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here today and for giving this a try and feeling into this together. We have the next few sessions coming up, which revolve around on the 5th of May in Nurturing the Fields of Change, exploring ritual and liminality. And specifically there, how we move from cultures that feel they're engaging with a lot of trauma, cultures of trauma, as Francis Weller has called them, psychotherapist, to cultures of initiation. So how we can work with psychospiritual practices to nurture healing and wholeness, in a way building on what we have done here today. And then we also have a session coming up in Nurturing the Fields of Change, where we explore artificial intelligence, which we looked at a couple of months ago, but we're coming back to that through the eyes of Wakani Hoffman, who works with AI, but utilizes the principles of Ubuntu to see how AI can be informed by more an indigenous stance, and how that might help reframe what AI can deliver. So take care, everyone. Say goodbye. Look after yourselves. It was great to have you here, and we see each other soon.
Yeah.
Bye for now. Feel free to unmute and say bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Renée.
you.
Kira.